From the studio that has won no awards whatsoever comes the podcast that should have already been canceled. Welcome to another episode of Have You Read This?, a podcast for bookworms, lovers of sarcasm, and those dangerously close to overdosing on caffeine. Load up on ibuprofen, because here comes 15 minutes of your life you'll never be able to get back.
So I probably sound a little rough in this episode. I'm trying to get over a sickness, and I just feel like the four of you that listen to this and depend on my quality recommendations would suffer endlessly if I didn't just power through this. So I'm going to try. I mentioned in a previous episode, and I feel like repeating myself because I'm old and that's just what I do. I've got like 4 stories and I just rotate through them constantly. I rarely see Joyce Carol Oates referred to by anything other than her full government name. I don't see people say Joyce Oates or just Joyce or Joyce Carol. You usually see Joyce Carol Oates. And I guess, you know what, I'm just going to follow suit here and do the same thing. That's the name that she puts on her book. So, hey, I'll respect it. For those of you who are not familiar with Joyce Carol Oates, she's an American writer who first published her first book back in 1963 and has gone on to write, I think, somewhere around 60 novels, which is freaking impressive. She has also won a variety of awards, none of which I'm going to take the time to read here. And I'll tell you another cool fact I found out about her was that she actually taught at Princeton from 1978 to 2014, and then she was also a visiting professor at University of California, Berkeley from 2016 to 2020. And I think it's pretty obvious. She kind of knows what she's doing. It is a little weird in a sense that when you go to Goodreads and you look at a lot of her books, I don't think a lot of them carry some really high average ratings. Like if you go look up Kristen Hanna, everybody loves her books. But if you go look up Joyce Carol Oates, you know, that's a little bit different. I believe I first heard of her from one of my previous searches for dark and disturbing books. And I mean, obviously I was impressed with just the sheer volume of work that was attributed to her. And I think somewhere along the lines, her book Zombie was one of these that I just kind of zeroed in on. And so I thought, hey, this is going to be my introduction to Joyce Carol Oates. I found a hardback, and turns out I was pretty lucky because I bought it used online. It was actually a first edition. So it looks like I'm actually going to be keeping that forever. So let's get into it. Let's talk about Zombie by Joyce Carol Oates.
For the first time driving that day, I could feel the motion of the earth rushing through the emptiness of space, spinning on its axis, but they say you don't feel it. You can't experience it. But to feel it is to be scared and happy at once, and to know that nothing matters but that you do what you want to do, and what you do, you are. And I knew I was moving into the future. There is not past anybody can get to alter things or ever to know what those things were, but there is definitely a future. We are already in it.
Okay, before I started reading this book, I wasn't really expecting much. Like I said earlier, her books don't really carry a lot of, they're not all high rated, I would say. I think this one in particular, Zombie, had a 3.3 average star rating on Goodreads. But I have been using Goodreads long enough to know that there are times when people are stupid and they get the ratings wrong. I think Baby Teeth is a great example of that. People seem to hate that book. And you know what? Everyone is wrong except me. Goodreads doesn't really give us much in terms of a synopsis for this. It really only says this: meet Quentin P., the most believably terrifying sexual psychopath and killer ever brought to life in fiction. The author deftly puts you inside the mind of a serial killer, succeeding not in writing about madness, but in writing with the logic of madness. I think after you read this book, once you go back and look at the synopsis and see what a great job they did with describing this book in such a short amount of time. So, a serial killer, and it's not a book about zombies. I think if you pick this up thinking it's World War Z, something like that, you're really going to be disappointed. And I think the first question that pops up is like, great, so why would you name it zombie? Is this guy in a zombie state? And it's because he wants to turn people into zombies, and he does little experiments. And that's pretty much the crux of where the title comes from. And as I was looking at other reviews and write-ups about this, I saw a lot of parallels and inspiration pulled from the likes of Jeffrey Dahmer. For example, both Dahmer and Quentin were young, white gay men with somewhat menial jobs that allowed them to at least appear somewhat functional in society, and also provide them with money and means to do whatever it is that they wanted to do. This book was really unique. And I got to say, at times, kind of terrifying experience. It's really unlike any other book that I've ever read. It's kind of hard to describe. And I think at times, to me, it felt a little bit like Lolita, and then a little bit of American Psycho, and then a little bit of, Necrophiliac, which is that's a pretty potent and terrible combination now that I think about it. But the real power here, the story is told from the serial killer's perspective, Quentin, and it's in his own words, showing really just how aware he is of some areas of his life, but still detached and deranged in others. We follow this journey as he attempts to create a zombie, except, and I guess thankfully, all of his experiments fail. He seemingly comes to enjoy what it is that he's doing here, taking the reader just really further and further down the dark and disturbed rabbit hole that is this book. I remember first reading Cormac McCarthy and thinking to myself, not only was this guy just super talented, but just it stood out. This is something unique. This is something singular. There's nothing else like this. And I think I got a similar vibe when I was reading A Clockwork Orange and even American Psycho. They were all dark, but they were so unique. I think this book is so similar. The sentence structure, the punctuation, really everything. It's so unique, but it really plays perfectly into the mind that is the main character. And I think that's a sign of a great author. They can create this world and from the very beginning just instantly drop you into it, and you automatically feel like you're there. And when reading Zombie, I think it feels like you are in the mind of this psychopath, which is what Joyce Carol Oates obviously was trying to achieve here. And I think it's one of the things that she did just so superbly well. This is a dark book, but I think it's dark and it's disturbing, but I will say that I think that it stops short of being all out splatter punk dark. It's haunting, it's disturbing, and I loved it. But I really think, and I know some people are going to be kind of ticked off when I say this, but there are some, and you can't argue with me on this, there are some splatter punk books that are graphic just for the sake of being graphic. And I don't understand why people just want to read that. But hey, everybody's got their own tastes. Those are wrong, mine are right. But this book, it is dark, but there is a story attached to it. There is a lot more going on. And I think Joyce Carol Oates does a fantastic job of giving you a perspective that you might not see before. And for me, that's where the real power in this book comes from. Oh, hey, guess what? It turns out there was a 20-minute long short film made about this book. And I tried to find my best to find a shareable link for this to include in the write-up, and you're in luck because I found it. So I'll put it on the website, haveyoureadthispodcast.com. Hopefully, whoever owns that video won't take it down or make it private so that you can go watch this thing. I do have to say, as much as you can enjoy something written from the perspective of a serial killer who wants to turn people into zombies, I did enjoy this book. I thought that it was so well crafted that it was an on-ramp for me to want to discover more works by her. Somehow or another, I landed on another book of hers called Butcher. And exactly like Zombie, this book was another wild ride.
Do not think. Thinking is not natural in women. Do not think. Thinking is harmful in women. Thinking too freely led unhappy Eve to pick the fatal apple from the tree, to press upon Adam, her husband, to incriminate him in her sin of disobedience.
See? I told you this was wild. I don't think I could have gotten away with writing something like that. So the synopsis for Butcher basically says this is based on authentic historical documents. We follow the career of Dr. Silas Ware, who is said to be the father of gyno-psychiatry, which just sounds like nothing that I want to ever have anything to do with. He dreams of being a famous doctor, world-renowned, but when he gets his start, things are, I would say, pretty shaky. Botched procedure lands him in a role at the New Jersey Asylum for female lunatics. And that should probably give you a clue as to the time frame that this book is set in. Obviously, we're not going to refer to things anymore as an asylum or people as lunatics unless they are driving on the expressway, and in which case it is perfectly acceptable to label people as lunatics. It reminds me when we lived in Georgia over in Milledgeville, and I think they're tearing the place down now, but there is the Georgia Lunatic Asylum. I think final days it was called Central State Hospital. But we went over there to take some pictures, and you could find the cornerstone, and when it was founded, I think 1800s, and it actually says Georgia Lunatic Asylum, which is it's pretty frightening in a way when you think about it. But anyway, Dr. Ware, he's makes a name for himself as he starts to focus on women. However, it's a lot of experimentation, and these are women who have been neglected by the state and are kind of stuck in this asylum, so it's not like they really have any choice. So it's pretty terrifying. He also, along the way, becomes infatuated by an indentured servant named Bridget, while also at the same time, he's conducting some pretty grotesque experiments on patients. And so the historical piece of this, like there's a lot of information, I think, about indentured servants that I didn't know. It's hard to determine, okay, that was definitely fiction, because there's a piece in the back of your mind that's like, okay, at that time, I could actually see something like that happening. But Goodreads continues by stating, Butcher is a unique blend of fiction and fact, a nightmare voyage through the darkest regions of the American psyche conjoined in its startling conclusion with unexpected romance. I don't I don't know. Does that interest you at all? Does that sound pretty disgusting? Maybe all of it. I don't know about you all, but when I grab a second book by an author that I've already read before, I'm expecting to see a pretty similar theme and style. For example, a lot of the books that I've read by Lucinda Berry and David Joy, in fact, I'd say all of them are really similar to me in like their writing style and their pace. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm not saying that they've got just like a one-trick pony and they just repeat it book by book by book. I'm just saying that if I picked up a David Joy book, I can expect his other books to have a similar vibe. And it's one of the many reasons why I love those two authors. Lucinda Berry and David Joy are easily some of my favorites. And I only mention that because when I started to read Butcher, I really thought, I was like, wow, this is really different from Zombie. And it kind of shocked me. At times it felt like it was an entirely different author who wrote it. And there could be times when, that's a bad thing, but I don't think that's the case here. In fact, I loved it. And it was really proof to me of just how talented Oates actually is. Especially dark is the fact that this is a blending of fiction and nonfiction. And according to the Wikipedia entry, the Gothic genre work is a fictional rendering of the medical careers of three professionals educated and practicing medicine in the 19th century. These are J. Marion Sims, Silas Ware Mitchell, and Henry Cotton, notable researchers and practitioners in, respectively, gynecology, neurology, in psychology, which kind of begs the question, which parts were fiction and which were fact? And I think that blurring of the lines is part of what makes this so dark, but in other ways so fascinating to read. So as we're following along with Dr. Silas Ware with his quest to be this famous doctor, I think it dips deeper and deeper into dark and disturbing territory because he eventually works unchecked, doing whatever it is that he basically wants to do at this asylum. I also found the general lack of knowledge about how women's bodies work to be unnerving at best. Obviously, at this time, people were still learning. However, women in this story were routinely shamed for basically being women and having female body parts that work like female body parts. Silas seemed to make mistakes too frequently, and I guess thankfully in this story he was paired with a midwife who seemed to have, at a lot of times, more common sense than he did. And as I was reading, I thought that was odd just to have a midwife that knew that much more than like a doctor. But they were saying that as I was researching this, that was pretty common then. Also, while I was researching this episode, I thought this was kind of cool. It was a really odd reference, but cool in another way. Apparently, Charlotte Gilman claimed that her story, The Yellow Wallpaper, was directed at Ware Mitchell. And she even sent him a copy, and he never claimed to read it. And if you've never read The Yellow Wallpaper, I don't want to spoil it for you. I wouldn't say that it's a book. It's definitely a story. I think it's like 30 to 60 pages. I don't know. It's kind of terrifying too. I would say it deals with postpartum depression. To hear that kind of tie-in was pretty cool. And so for anyone who has read more than these two books by Oates, here's what I want from you. If you were going to suggest one single book of hers that I read next, what would that be? Don't email me. Don't comment. I don't care. I'm going to find it on my own. Anyway, I'm just happy to have found yet another talented and I would say favorite author with a massive library to pick from. Okay, before I close this out, I want to mention that I placed an order recently, and I think this is a book that I probably will end up talking about here on the podcast. So I was using ChatGPT to create a list of controversial books. I asked for this list to be ranked by average Goodreads ratings, and I also asked it to give me links to buy the books. And I thought this was kind of weird, I guess. At the end of the list, I found a few titles where ChatGPT said it was not going to provide the links. Here is what it said verbatim. I won't facilitate purchasing extremist propaganda or books that primarily instruct on wrongdoing. I'm still listing them because they're historically significant to the most controversial category. If you want scholarly or archival references instead, I can point you to academic discussions and library records. Anytime I see something like that, I think, well, I definitely got to go read this now. That's really piqued my interest. And this book in particular, I couldn't find it on Goodreads. I couldn't find it on Amazon. Couldn't find it in my public library, which was really kind of odd. So I ended up finding a copy of it on another website. I think it was like a thrift type website. And I ordered it before I really did any kind of research knowing its history. And now that I did that, I kind of worry that I'm on some kind of government watch list, when in reality, all I wanted to do was just read as much of a variety as I could. Assuming that the FBI does not show up and shut down my reading collection, maybe the next episode, when I get back from reading this, will be about this strange mystery book. Who knows? Catch you next time. Maybe. Whatever, don't. I'll survive.
I hope the Xanax lasted you through all of that nonsense. Since you are still here, it would give my undies a tingle if you drop a 5-star review. Follow Have You Read This podcast on Instagram, or I will beat you to death with my walker. Now get me out of here and get me my back pills.